The summer of 1940 had brought the Battle of Britain to its peak, and the skies over England had become a deadly chessboard. The roar of aircraft engines filled the air as Spitfires and Hurricanes scrambled from airfields across the country, desperately trying to intercept waves of German bombers. The Royal Air Force pilots fought with courage, skill, and sheer determination, yet a mysterious danger lurked far closer than enemy bullets. Time and again, pilots reported a strange and terrifying failure. Engines cutting out in the middle of dives, planes suddenly losing power at the most critical moments. They called it the English disease, a problem that made even the most experienced pilots feel helpless in the sky. The phenomenon was not caused by enemy fire, nor by sabotage, but by an insidious flaw in the very engines that powered Britain's defense. Royce Merlin engines, celebrated for their power and reliability, were suddenly proving to be unpredictable. When pilots pushed their Spitfires into steep dives to engage enemy aircraft, fuel would flood the carburetor in a way the engine could not handle. The result was catastrophic. Airmen would scream as the propellers slowed, the aircraft wobbling uncontrollably, the ground rushing up faster than their hearts could beat. Some pilots bailed out in panic, others were swallowed by the English Channel, never to return. Investigations began, but the problem proved stubborn. Engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment and Rolls-Royce tried every conventional solution, but the carburetor simply refused to behave under combat conditions. The Air Ministry watched nervously as pilot after pilot was lost, their heroic efforts undone by a hidden flaw. The tension in the airfields was palpable. Ground crews whispered about the curse of the dive, while commanders struggled to explain the losses in reports to London. Families of pilots clutched telegrams, unsure if they would ever see their sons again. Meanwhile, across the country, one mind began to focus on the problem with a clarity few could match. Beatrice Shilling, a brilliant engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, had been studying the Merlin engines closely. She was young, determined, and unafraid to challenge authority, but she understood that time was critical. Every day the RAF flew missions with the engines prone to failure, lives hung in balance. Shilling was methodical. She examined the fuel flow, the carburetor design, and the behavior of the engine under rapid acceleration and sudden dives. She ran experiments that were precise yet daring, sometimes in ways the Air Ministry would never have approved. Her colleagues marveled at her ability to translate complex mechanical problems into simple, workable solutions. Outside her laboratory, the war continued unabated. The Luftwaffe pressed hard, aiming to cripple Britain's defenses in preparation for an invasion. Every mission mattered, and every pilot lost was a blow not only to morale, but to the nation's very survival. Pilots flew with anxiety, knowing that even if they outmaneuvered enemy fighters, their own planes could betray them. Stories began to circulate among squadrons about near misses where engines had failed and then restarted, leaving pilots shaken but alive. Some considered the problem unsolvable, a cruel quirk of engineering that no human hand could fix. But Beatrice Shilling refused to accept that conclusion. She believed that careful observation, combined with ingenuity, could overcome what many considered a death sentence in the sky. While pilots risked their lives every day, she risked reputation, career, and authority by pursuing unorthodox approaches to the Merlin carburetors. In quiet workshops, she tinkered with metal and brass, testing ideas that seemed too simple to be true, yet could make the difference between life and death. News of engine failures spread rapidly. Commanders demanded answers, while mechanics grew frustrated by the elusive problem. Each dive that ended in a stalled engine reminded everyone of the invisible enemy within their machines. Rumors of phantom failures reached London, and the pressure on engineers to solve the crisis mounted. Across the airfields, young pilots whispered prayers before taking off, hoping their Spitfires would hold together under the extreme stresses of dogfights. The skies over Britain had become a battlefield not only against German aircraft, but against an invisible flaw that threatened to undo all the courage and skill of the RAF. Every sortie was a gamble, every mission a test of human bravery against mechanical uncertainty. Yet within this chaos, a quiet determination was growing, embodied in the meticulous calculations and daring experiments of one woman who refused to accept the limitations imposed by faulty engineering. While the world watched the skies, unaware of the secret struggle behind each engine, Beatrice Shilling began the work that would save countless lives, a story of courage and intellect that would soon change the course of air combat forever. And so the stage was set. The RAF pilots would continue to face the Luftwaffe with grit and skill, but the seeds of a solution had been planted, quietly, brilliantly, by a woman whose name would come to symbolize ingenuity under pressure. The engines still roared, the skies still burned, and the fate of Britain hung in a delicate balance, awaiting the intervention that only a mind like Shilling's could deliver.
While the skies over Britain burned with conflict, the story of the woman who might save those flying lives was only beginning to unfold. Beatrice Shilling was not a typical engineer of her time. Born in 1909, she had grown up with a fascination for machines, taking apart bicycles and radios just to see how they worked. At a time when women were rarely encouraged to pursue science or engineering, she excelled, earning degrees in mathematics and physics, and later moving into the world of aeronautical engineering. Her brilliance was matched by an unyielding determination. She had a mind that thrived on solving problems others deemed impossible. When World War II broke out, her skills were urgently needed. The Royal Aircraft Establishment, responsible for testing and improving British aircraft, recognized her talent, and she quickly became one of their most trusted engineers. She was young, striking, and focused, yet she possessed a quiet authority that commanded respect in a room full of men. Her colleagues soon realized that when Beatrice approached a problem, it was not merely technical, it was personal. The failures of the Merlin engines that left pilots stranded in the air haunted her. She could not ignore them. She studied reports, interviewed mechanics, and pored over diagrams for hours on end. Every detail mattered: the flow of fuel through the carburetor, the precise timing of the engine's valves, the subtle differences between various Merlin models. She observed patterns that others missed, noticing how even a minor change in angle during a steep dive could send the engine into sudden failure. But Shilling was not content with theory alone. She understood that in wartime, solutions needed to be practical and fast. Laboratory experiments were one thing, but the real test was whether an idea could be applied directly to frontline aircraft. She began small, tinkering with models and test rigs, creating miniature devices to regulate fuel flow, adjusting tolerances with exacting precision. Her work was methodical, and her intuition was unmatched. She would watch the behavior of engines under simulated combat conditions, recording every stutter, hesitation, and surge. Others had tried to fix the problem using complicated modifications or entirely new carburetors, but these approaches were slow, expensive, and often impractical. Shilling's genius was in seeing a simple solution where everyone else saw only complexity. She imagined a device that could restrict the fuel in just the right way, preventing the engine from flooding during dives while maintaining full power during normal flight. It seemed almost too simple, yet her calculations and experiments proved it could work. Beyond her technical skill, Shilling's courage set her apart. She understood that her work might provoke resistance from the Air Ministry. Bureaucracy and tradition often slowed innovation, especially when the solution came from a young woman in a male-dominated field. Many engineers would have waited for approval, for official protocols to catch up with necessity. Beatrice did not. She believed that pilots' lives were at stake, and she acted with quiet defiance. In workshops tucked away from prying eyes, she tested prototypes, measuring every drop of fuel, every rotation of the engine. She experimented with different metals, shapes, and diameters, refining her invention with patience and precision. Her colleagues watched in awe, some skeptical, others inspired, as she approached a problem that had stumped the entire aviation industry. Shilling's work extended beyond the technical. She immersed herself in the world of the pilots she aimed to save. She listened to their accounts of sudden engine failure, the terror of helplessly plummeting toward the earth, the moments when skill and reflex were not enough to prevent disaster. These stories fueled her determination. Every dive that ended in engine cutout became a personal challenge. She knew that even the bravest pilots could not overcome a flaw in their own machines. Her role was invisible yet monumental. While men flew the aircraft, she fought her own battle behind the scenes, armed with equations, mechanical intuition, and an unshakable will. Her colleagues began to notice that her solutions were elegant in their simplicity. Where others proposed complicated devices requiring extensive modification, Shilling's designs were small, effective, and easy to install. She understood that in wartime, practicality was as vital as innovation. Testing her ideas required both courage and ingenuity. Some experiments were dangerous, pushing engines to their limits in controlled environments, yet she persisted, documenting every anomaly, every success, every failure. She often worked late into the night, her mind refusing to rest until she could see a clear path forward. Beyond the technical, Shilling also had to navigate the politics of wartime bureaucracy. She had to convince skeptics, persuade hesitant supervisors, and find allies willing to risk their careers alongside hers. Her charm, intelligence, and quiet confidence proved crucial. Slowly, she gained support, enough to begin real-world testing on frontline aircraft, even as the Air Ministry remained cautious. By combining rigorous engineering with a deep understanding of human stakes, Shilling was shaping a solution that would save lives before it was officially sanctioned. Every pilot she had yet to meet, every young man climbing into a Spitfire with fear and determination, was unknowingly counting on her brilliance. Her work exemplified the unsung heroism of wartime engineers, those who fought battles of intellect and innovation while bullets flew elsewhere. As the RAF prepared for new waves of combat, Shilling's experiments grew closer to fruition. She understood that the solution had to be more than theoretical. It had to be ready for the chaos of battle. Each refinement brought her nearer to a device that could prevent sudden engine failure, a device that could give pilots the chance to return safely from deadly dogfights over the English Channel. In those moments, in quiet workshops and cluttered labs, she carried the weight of the sky itself. The courage of men in combat depended on the clarity and precision of her mind. Beatrice Shilling's journey as an engineer was no longer about recognition or personal achievement. It was about life and death. The pilots flying missions against the Luftwaffe had no idea that a single woman's insight could alter their fate. They did not know that someone was preparing to intercept the invisible enemy within their engines, a flaw that no soldier could fight, a flaw that no weapon could overcome. And yet, step by step, experiment by experiment, she moved closer to a solution that would soon change the course of air combat, saving countless lives and rewriting what was thought possible in wartime engineering. The stage was set, the pilots were in the air, and the world awaited the results of one brilliant mind working quietly, determinedly, against impossible odds. Beatrice Shilling's story was far from over, but the foundation of her impact had been laid. Every calculation, every prototype, every late night spent refining her invention brought her closer to the moment when she would take a risk that no one else dared, a moment that would transform the fate of the RAF and ensure that the English skies remained defended, not just by bravery and bullets, but by ingenuity and courage.
The problem had persisted for months.
RAF pilots continued to lose their lives not to enemy fire, but to the very machines meant to protect them. Each report of engine failure in a steep dive weighed heavily on Beatrice Shilling. She knew the solution could not wait for bureaucracy or committee approval. Time was measured not in weeks, but in sorties, in lives lost over the English Channel, in planes that never returned to their airfields. Shilling had been observing the Merlin engines with obsessive focus. Every carburetor, every fuel line, every minor adjustment was noted, tested, and retested. She discovered a critical pattern. When pilots performed steep dives, fuel would flood the carburetor, causing the engine to stall. The situation was life-threatening, and traditional solutions proposed by the Air Ministry were slow, cumbersome, and sometimes impractical for immediate deployment. The need for a quick, effective fix became urgent. Shilling knew that an elegant, simple device could solve the problem, but creating it required not just engineering skill, but boldness. She designed a small restrictor made of brass that could regulate fuel flow in a precise way, preventing the engine from flooding while allowing it to operate at full power in normal flight. It seemed almost too simple, yet the calculations, tests, and simulations confirmed it could work. The genius of her solution was its simplicity. It could be installed quickly, it did not require extensive modification to the aircraft, and it worked reliably under the extreme stresses of combat. But the brilliance of her invention was matched by the risk it entailed. She had to act without official permission, because waiting for bureaucratic approval could mean more pilots lost in combat. Installing the device in frontline Spitfires required stealth and determination. Beatrice coordinated with sympathetic engineers and mechanics who shared her sense of urgency. Late at night, in dimly lit workshops, they worked to produce prototypes, carefully fitting the brass restrictors and testing them under controlled conditions. She meticulously measured every angle, every diameter, ensuring that the device would perform perfectly when the stakes were highest. The Air Ministry, bound by regulations and tradition, would have considered her actions unauthorized. Had she been caught installing an unapproved modification, the consequences could have included court-martial or dismissal. Yet she pressed on, guided by the knowledge that every day the pilots flew without a solution, more lives were at risk. The first tests on operational aircraft were nerve-wracking. Mechanics watched as the Spitfires roared to life, the engines pushed through steep dives, and for the first time in months, the feared stalls did not occur. Pilots who took the modified planes into combat reported immediate improvements. The aircraft no longer betrayed them mid-dive. Control returned to their hands. The relief was palpable. The brass device, almost invisible to the naked eye, was already saving lives. Beatrice's careful calculations, relentless experimentation, and quiet courage had transformed theory into action. The ingenuity of a single engineer had altered the very nature of aerial combat over Britain. Despite the secrecy, word of the improved performance began to spread among pilots. Tales of sudden engine failures dwindled, replaced by stories of aircraft that performed flawlessly, even under the most extreme maneuvers. Squadrons gained confidence, morale improved, and the pilots began to trust their machines in ways they had not for months. Yet the stakes remained high. Each flight into combat was still a gamble, and Beatrice understood that any flaw in her device could have catastrophic consequences. She continued to refine her design, running tests on new aircraft and ensuring that every installation was flawless. The combination of courage, intellect, and precision became her hallmark. In the workshops, she became a legend among engineers and mechanics, though largely unknown to the pilots themselves. They flew into battle unaware that their lives depended on a woman they would never meet, whose quiet brilliance had solved a problem that had confounded the entire aviation establishment. Her invention was more than a mechanical fix, it was a lifeline. By regulating fuel flow, the device ensured that Spitfires could perform the dives necessary to engage enemy fighters without the constant threat of engine failure. It gave pilots the confidence to push their machines to the limit, turning potential disaster into opportunity. The defiance she showed in acting without permission was not reckless. It was calculated, deliberate, and grounded in deep knowledge. She understood the risk of disobedience, yet judged that the lives of pilots outweighed any bureaucratic consequence. The Air Ministry, unaware of her actions at first, would later come to recognize the significance of her work. Beatrice had not only solved a critical engineering problem, she had done so with speed and ingenuity that no official process could match. Her brass device became known unofficially among mechanics as Shilling's solution, a small component with an enormous impact. The success of the modification demonstrated a vital truth. Sometimes innovation required courage as much as intellect. In the midst of wartime pressures, the usual rules of procedure could not always keep pace with the needs of combat. Beatrice Shilling's willingness to challenge authority, to act decisively, and to trust her calculations and instincts saved countless lives and preserved Britain's aerial defense at a critical moment in history. Pilots who once feared the English skies began to feel a renewed sense of confidence. They could engage enemy aircraft without the shadow of mechanical failure hanging over every dive. The brass device, small and unassuming, became a symbol of human ingenuity and courage under pressure, even if few would know the story behind it. As the Luftwaffe continued its attacks, the improved reliability of the Spitfires helped the RAF maintain its strength in the air. The battle was far from over, but the risk from within the aircraft itself had been dramatically reduced. Each flight now carried the potential for survival, skill, and victory rather than sudden catastrophe. In workshops and airfields across England, mechanics and engineers quietly installed the devices, following Beatrice's specifications to the letter. Every completed installation was a small act of defiance against the limitations that bureaucracy might have imposed, and a direct contribution to saving lives in the air. Beatrice Shilling's solution would eventually be recognized as one of the most important technical contributions to Britain's war effort. It was a triumph of intellect, courage, and determination, and it proved that a single individual working quietly behind the scenes could alter the course of history. In those days, while bombs fell and the skies raged with dogfights, one woman's ingenuity ensured that pilots had a fighting chance against both enemy aircraft and the invisible threat lurking in their own engines. The story of Shilling's device was more than engineering. It was a story of daring, creativity, and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed. It demonstrated that innovation sometimes demanded not just intelligence, but bravery and a willingness to risk everything in service of others. And so, as the RAF continued to defend the nation, the lives of countless pilots were now protected by a small brass invention, by the mind and determination of a woman who refused to accept the status quo, and by her unwavering commitment to solving a deadly problem that no pilot alone could overcome.
The skies over Britain had grown both familiar and deadly. Pilots of the Royal Air Force had grown used to the roar of engines, the sight of enemy aircraft approaching in deadly formation, and the tension that gripped every sortie. But now, thanks to a small brass device quietly installed in Spitfires across the country, the invisible threat of engine failure that had haunted them was diminishing. Pilots who had once approached steep dives with a mix of fear and desperation were beginning to experience a new sensation: confidence. It was subtle at first, the feeling that the aircraft beneath them would respond as it should, that the engine would not betray them when they needed it most. Yet this subtle shift had an enormous impact. Spitfires and Hurricanes could now dive and climb aggressively, outmaneuvering the Luftwaffe with precision and speed.
Dogfights over the English Channel became less a struggle against one's own machinery and more a contest of skill and strategy. Mechanics and engineers watched with quiet pride as their work, led by Beatrice Shilling, translated directly into saved lives and successful missions. Reports from squadrons started to show a dramatic decrease in engine-related incidents. Pilots described the sensation of pushing their aircraft through maneuvers that would have previously caused a stall, feeling the power of the Merlin engine respond exactly as expected. They could chase Messerschmitt Bf-109s, execute tight turns, and recover from dives without fearing the sudden failure that had so often claimed their comrades. The device, though small, had transformed combat readiness. It gave the RAF an edge not only in machinery but in morale. Pilots could focus on tactics, formation, and target acquisition, rather than constantly worrying about their own engines betraying them. Every flight carried renewed hope. Every successful mission strengthened the resolve of men who had endured months of uncertainty and loss. Stories began to circulate among squadrons. One pilot recounted a dive over the channel where his Spitfire's engine had previously stalled repeatedly. This time, with the modification installed, he was able to engage an enemy fighter at point-blank range, turn the tables, and drive it away. Another pilot described chasing a bomber formation without the usual anxiety, knowing that his aircraft could sustain aggressive maneuvers. The change was subtle yet life-saving, and it spread like wildfire through RAF circles. Behind every success was the quiet hand of Shilling's invention, a reminder that not all heroism happened in the sky. Mechanics became guardians of this knowledge, installing the devices carefully and ensuring that every aircraft leaving the airfield was ready for battle. The pilots themselves might never see the woman who had saved them, yet her impact was woven into every flight, every maneuver, every dogfight. As the Luftwaffe raids intensified, RAF squadrons could engage more effectively. The improved reliability of the Merlin engines allowed Spitfires to take risks they could not have taken before. Steep dives, sharp climbs, and rapid changes in speed became viable strategies rather than acts of desperation. Commanders began to notice a shift in operational effectiveness. Missions that previously carried high risk of loss were completed with fewer casualties. The battle over the English skies was still brutal and relentless, but now, at least, pilots could trust their own aircraft. From Biggin Hill to coastal airfields across southern England, the difference was tangible. Reports flooded in of pilots returning safely from engagements that had, only weeks before, claimed lives due to engine failure. Each return was a testament to engineering brilliance and quiet determination. Beatrice Shilling, far from the front line, could only imagine the thrill and terror of these dogfights, yet she understood that her device had given pilots the margin of safety they desperately needed. The human cost of failure had been reduced, and the courage of RAF airmen was now supported by mechanical reliability. The psychological impact was equally profound. Pilots who had flown with constant dread now approached their missions with renewed confidence. They executed daring maneuvers, formed tighter formations, and engaged enemy fighters with strategies previously considered too risky. The skies became a stage for skill and bravery, rather than the lottery of chance dictated by engine quirks. Anecdotes of miraculous recoveries began to surface. One Spitfire pilot recounted entering a steep dive behind a Messerschmitt and expecting his engine to falter. Instead, it held steady, allowing him to line up the perfect shot. In another incident, a squadron returning from a bombing raid faced interception by enemy fighters. Pilots executed rapid climbs and dives, confident in their aircraft, and most returned safely. These were not coincidences, they were the result of Shilling's precise solution. The Luftwaffe noticed the difference as well. German pilots encountered RAF aircraft performing more aggressively, turning with greater agility, and returning from combat more reliably. What had once been a mechanical disadvantage for Britain had been neutralized. Air battles, previously tipped by hidden flaws, became fairer contests of skill. Yet Shilling's device remained a secret weapon, largely invisible to both friend and foe. Its small brass form disguised the monumental difference it had made. Mechanics knew of its existence, pilots benefited from its protection, and the RAF gained a strategic advantage that no one could attribute to conventional tactics. In the midst of ongoing combat, the true brilliance of the solution lay in its simplicity. It required no radical redesigns, no long bureaucratic approvals, and no extensive retraining of pilots. A small, precise adjustment, rooted in careful observation and brilliant engineering, had altered the course of air operations. The story of each successful engagement became intertwined with the invisible heroism behind it. Pilots who returned safely from harrowing dogfights owed their lives not only to their own skill, but to the quiet, unrecognized work of a woman who had defied authority to solve a deadly problem. As the Battle of Britain raged, the RAF began to stabilize its losses. Aircraft performance improved, sorties became more effective, and the morale of both pilots and ground crews strengthened. Every mission completed safely reinforced the confidence that had been eroded by months of engine failure. The difference made by a small brass device was monumental. Air combat continued to be dangerous, but the hidden threat within the Spitfires had been neutralized. Lives were saved, missions succeeded, and the ingenuity of Beatrice Shilling became one of the pivotal, if largely invisible, factors in Britain's aerial defense. In workshops, airfields, and laboratories, her work continued to inspire engineers and mechanics alike. Her approach, calm, precise, fearless, set a standard for solving problems under pressure, demonstrating that courage and intellect could be as critical as bullets and bombs. The impact of her device rippled far beyond individual missions. It changed tactics, allowed more aggressive engagement with enemy formations, and preserved the lives of countless pilots who might otherwise have been lost to mechanical failure. Each returned aircraft, each successful sortie, was a testament to human ingenuity triumphing over the hidden dangers of war. And so, as the RAF pilots soared through the skies of England, engaging in deadly dogfights over the Channel, they carried with them the silent protection of a solution devised by a brilliant mind. The engine that once threatened to fail mid-dive now responded flawlessly, every turn and dive guided by the unseen hand of Shilling's engineering genius. The skies remained dangerous, the Luftwaffe relentless, but the balance had shifted. In a world dominated by machines, bombs, and bullets, the quiet courage of a single engineer had given men the chance to survive, fight, and prevail. The story of those months was not only about dogfights and strategy, but about the profound impact of intellect and determination behind the scenes. Every pilot who returned safely owed their lives to her. Every tactical victory was made possible because in a small workshop far from the front lines, a woman had refused to accept that the problem could not be solved. She had acted with precision, courage, and unwavering commitment to change the course of air combat over Britain forever.
The roar of Merlin engines had quieted in Shilling's workshops, but the echo of her work reverberated across the skies of Britain. The Battle of Britain had turned, the immediate threat from the Luftwaffe had lessened, and yet the story of one woman's ingenuity continued to shape the air war. Beatrice Shilling had solved a problem that no pilot could, neutralizing a mechanical flaw that had cost countless lives and restored confidence to the Royal Air Force. Her invention, simple yet profound, became a silent guardian for the men who flew the Spitfires and Hurricanes, though few ever knew the name behind it. Recognition for her work did come, eventually, though it was slower than her deeds deserved. The Air Ministry, initially wary of her defiance and unapproved modifications, came to understand the monumental impact of her device. Engineers and mechanics who had worked alongside her celebrated her ingenuity and courage, spreading the story quietly among their peers. Shilling's brass restrictor became legendary in its own right, a testament to the idea that sometimes the smallest innovation can have the largest effect. Beyond immediate wartime benefits, her work set a precedent in military engineering. She demonstrated that thoughtful, practical solutions could save lives more effectively than large, complicated programs, and that innovation often required courage as much as intellect. Her insistence on observation, measurement, and testing under realistic conditions became a model for engineers across the country.
The influence of her methods extended beyond Merlin engines in the Battle of Britain. Aircraft development, testing protocols, and mechanical reliability standards were forever altered by her approach. Shilling's combination of technical brilliance and practical application inspired a generation of engineers, particularly women entering fields previously dominated by men. Her example proved that intelligence, persistence, and courage could break barriers and solve problems that had seemed insurmountable. Her legacy also extended to the human element of war. By giving pilots confidence in their machines, she altered the psychology of combat. Men could fight with skill rather than fear, take calculated risks, and execute maneuvers that previously might have been fatal. Each saved life, each successful mission was indirectly a product of her dedication. Beyond the airfields and laboratories, her story became a symbol of what one person could achieve when guided by principle, knowledge, and determination. During the years after the war, Shilling continued to advance aeronautical engineering. She contributed to jet propulsion research, high-speed flight, and various innovations that influenced post-war aviation. Yet the story of the English disease and her brass device remained a defining moment, a reminder that a single engineer's work could shape the course of history. The pilots she saved went on to share their own stories, describing miraculous recoveries from near-fatal engine failures, tales of dogfights where skill and courage triumphed over mechanical flaws, and the unseen hand that had made it possible. Shilling's story, though largely unknown to the public for many years, became celebrated as part of Britain's rich legacy of wartime innovation. Historians, engineers, and aviation enthusiasts began to recognize the extraordinary contribution of a woman whose work had directly influenced the outcome of aerial engagements during one of the most critical periods of the war. She became an icon not because of medals or ceremonies, but because of lives saved and battles altered by intellect, courage, and persistence. Her legacy reminds us that war is not only fought in the skies or on the front lines, it is also fought in workshops, laboratories, and offices where ingenuity meets necessity. The quiet heroism of people like Beatrice Shilling shapes outcomes in ways that are often invisible but profoundly impactful. Even today, the principles she demonstrated, careful observation, rigorous testing, and the courage to act decisively, remain essential in engineering, aviation, and problem-solving under pressure. She proved that solutions do not always require grandeur or complexity. Sometimes the right idea, executed precisely and courageously, is enough to change the course of history. Her story also challenges assumptions about who contributes to war efforts. While soldiers and pilots are often celebrated, the engineers, mechanics, and innovators who work behind the scenes play roles equally vital, if less visible. Beatrice Shilling embodies this truth. The legacy of her brass device is not merely mechanical, it is a human story of vision, determination, and the willingness to defy convention in service of others. As historians recount the Battle of Britain and the countless aerial duels fought over England, Shilling's contribution stands as a testament to intellect applied in extraordinary circumstances. The lives she saved, the confidence she restored, and the precedent she set for innovation under pressure endure. Her example resonates far beyond the Second World War, inspiring engineers, aviators, and problem solvers of all generations. The story concludes not with explosions or dogfights, but with reflection on the enduring impact of courage, intellect, and quiet heroism. Beatrice Shilling's life reminds us that history is not only shaped by those in combat, but also by those who dare to act decisively behind the scenes. In the skies of England, the engines continued to roar, pilots continued to fly, and the nation remained defended. But every maneuver executed without fear, every Spitfire that returned safely, carried with it the invisible mark of a woman who had changed the game forever. Her work exemplifies the profound difference that one determined mind can make, turning observation into action, intellect into protection, and courage into life-saving innovation.
In remembering her, we celebrate not only a brilliant engineer, but a symbol of what is possible when talent, persistence, and daring meet necessity. Beatrice Shilling's legacy is eternal, not written in monuments or headlines, but in every safe landing, every successful mission, and every life spared in the skies she helped protect. And as history recounts the Battle of Britain, her story serves as a reminder that the quiet genius behind the scenes can be as vital, as heroic, and as transformative as the bravest pilot in the air.